almost overnight practically, we went from about $25 to $50 per acre back to almost back to what it was pre-farm crisis levels here. So if you are a farm equipment dealer and you managed to make it through those really bad years, you kind of got rewarded right here during this point in time here. Well, that number kind of carried forward, and again, these numbers are all adjusted for inflation here, so you don't have to worry about inflation side. But we kind of kept our historical norms all the way from about 1990 up to about 2007 or so. What happened in 2007 though? I kind of termed that period kind of the second golden age of agriculture, right? We had the ethanol boom, prices practically double overnight. We had a lot of farmers who saw some really good net farm incomes from the period 2007 to 2012, probably record levels, even adjusting for the inflation in sight. Well, what do you think happens when someone sees their net income basically double overnight? I mean, if you didn't have a farm job and you worked at some city job somewhere and you had your income suddenly double, what would be the first thing you guys would do? I'm not talking about this from a farmer's perspective, but from someone with a regular full-time city job. What would you do if your income doubled? Would you go out and maybe buy something? You wouldn't invest at all, would you? You'd probably go out and maybe buy a new car, pickup truck, something like that. What do you guys think farmers did? You're laughing. Did you go out and do some of this? Yeah, it's the same thing I would do. I would go out and buy myself some new tractors, combines. At least upgrade, maybe buy a little bit extra. And that's what happened. There's nothing wrong with it. That's a perfectly normal human response. It's your chance to upgrade your machinery level. I think most people would take advantage of that thing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think you can look at this extra levels of machinery that we accumulated from 2007 to about 2010 or 12. You can almost look at that now as a bank of machinery that you guys have out there. So the fact that we're heading in the middle of a farm crisis right now with some low prices and low net farm incomes, you actually have a reserve of machinery out there that you guys can tap into and use that to meet your cash flow needs going forward for this next couple of years until things hopefully will improve here. So we're pretty high levels now here, so we can kind of drop this back over the next several years, and that will still, even if we don't buy anything for the next couple of years, that will only get us back to what we were probably pre farm boom right here. And then if it does go further, you can probably do like we did in the 80s and even draw down even further here. So I don't look at that extra machinery buying during the late 2000s here as being a bad thing. I think that's actually a good thing, because you do have a reserve out there that you can tap into. And I expect if you guys have visited your machinery dealers right now, most of them are probably hurting for people to come in the door. They'll probably welcome you with open arms if you came in and said you were interested in buying something. All right, this is a graph kind of showing the correlation between net farm income per acre, which is the blue line you see here, and this red line represents the change in our machinery assets. So it's almost a proxy for how much machinery that they're buying here. So basically, if the red line is above 0, that means you're adding machinery quicker than the depreciation is going down. And if it's below 0, that means you're not buying enough to keep up with whatever depreciation is happening here. But notice how strongly these two things match here. There's about a 0.69 correlation between net farm income and what our change in machinery value, or how much machinery you're buying here. This is a pretty strong indication here. There's no lag at all happening when we look at this. When I look at some lag models and see, well, maybe we have a good year or a bad year of net farm income, maybe the machinery side shows up the next year or the year after that. That's not the case. Those machinery purchases actually show up in the year you're having a bad year. So like, let's say if this was a really good year, for example, you guys would be out there buying machinery to kind of match what happened during some of these better years right there. So I think there's several reasons why this happens, why farmers react so quickly to the change in net farm income. And I think it goes back to the second reason, or maybe the main thing farmers hate all when they look at the whole farming situation and net farm income and such. So you always want to make money, but what's the main thing farmers really hate to do? Pay taxes, right? I mean, it's almost an obsession in some cases. I talk to farmers who would rather get out of paying taxes than worrying about what the net farm income level was here. There must be some aversion to giving money to Uncle Sam. So I think you're seeing some of that show up right here. So farmers know when they're going to have a good year. I mean, you can kind of, even if you don't really keep really good records, you can sense when prices are good yields and such. So you realize you probably need to lower your net farm income. Well, one way of doing that is buying machinery, taking the 179 depreciation, getting your net farm income down, and you will meet your goal of not paying taxes by doing those kind of things. So the same thing in the bad year. So this is, obviously not going to be a good year. So obviously farmers aren't going to buy a whole lot of equipment, if anything at all here. And these things kind of follow each step in lockstep like that. The one thing that is surprising from the 1980 farm crisis is what happened with repairs per acre here. So this is a really nice graphic showing what the repair cost per acre. It shows a nice steady decline back from about anywhere from $20 to $40 per acre back in the late 70s till about 2007, where it got down to about $10 or $20 per acre, and then it kind of creeped up again, probably thanks to having more equipment at that point in time during the boom in grain prices here. But you would have expected, though, that as your equipment got older, you would have higher repairs and maintenance costs, right? That's kind of the way those things would go together. Newer equipment, you should have lower repairs. Older equipment, you have higher repairs. That didn't happen back during the first farm crisis here. You maybe see a little bit of a bump here, but for the most part, it was declining even during the farm crisis here. That, to me, is an indication that another way farmers got through the farm crisis, instead of paying money to your dealership to take care of the maintenance and repairs and such, farmers did a lot of that stuff on their own. You know, they basically went out to their machine shop and they figured things out, how to get things fixed, and that kept their repair and maintenance cost fairly low and going down during that time frame here. Which brings me to the question now, though, we're at this point right now, are we going to continue that trend of repair and maintenance costs going even or going down if we quit buying equipment? Can farmers today go out and do a lot of the stuff they did back in the 80s back on their equipment today? Now, I would argue it's going to be a lot tougher today, because if you guys have been reading some of the farm press, there's a whole big controversial topic going around right now about whether these machinery companies actually have copyright issues on the software and on the tractors and stuff. I mean, you can't buy a tractor today or combine that doesn't take some electronics where you really need a computer to plug it in and fix it, right? That wasn't the case back in the early 80s, late 80s here to fix equipment here. Today, that's an issue here. And with these copyright controversies, there's some issue of whether anybody besides the dealer can actually plug that tractor in and figure out what's wrong with it, because there's specialized software in there here. So that's something to keep an eye on, I think, for you guys. That may be an issue. I'm not sure how much it's going to come into play, but certainly something worth keeping your eye on to see if dealerships will fight that. I don't really think they will right now, but you never know, though. So keep an eye on that. So some options for machinery. So as you know, sooner or later you're going to have to buy some more machinery, or at least you need machinery to get your current operations done. Certainly, I think if farmers had the option, they would like to buy machinery in most cases, but with the way the cash flow situation is, I think we need to look at all possibilities going forward here. So I think if, and again, there's within the purchase option, there's several categories here. So you can replace frequently, something every year when cash is available, or keep it forever. And there's different, I've seen this strategy, each of these strategies work in different cases for different people here. And then we also have lease, rent, and possibly custom hire here. So looking at this from the replace frequently, that probably means you replace a lot of your equipment every year or two or so. And I've only talked to a few farmers that actually practice this. One was a case where I talked to a farmer in western Kansas. He farmed about, not western Kansas, western Kentucky, when I was at Kentucky for a couple of years. He actually practiced a strategy. He basically traded all his equipment, all his combines, all his tractors every single year. And he said he could show me by pencil and paper and working out the numbers that that was actually the lowest cost option for him. Now, he was a little bit unusual situation because his dealership and him had this kind of almost like a merry-go-round arrangement. So he traded all his equipment every year. Someone else bought his year-old equipment, and then someone else bought his two-year-old equipment. So it just kept, passing down from one person to the next, and it worked out really good in that particular area. But he did it mainly for the reliability factor. He was stretching all his equipment pretty thin, where he really couldn't afford any downtime. If you trade all your equipment every year and you're a 15,000-acre farmer, deer's going to be pretty good friends to you, right? They're going to love you as a customer, and basically they had guaranteed him a maximum of 4-hour downtime. So if he would have a combine break during the middle of harvest season, Deere would guarantee him that they would have it up and running within 4 hours. Otherwise, they would ship him another combine out there to use to help get his crop out here. That was worth a lot of money to him, and it worked out for him. Now, I would argue that probably most farmers probably can't make it work out the way he did, but for some farmers, that may be a possibility. The second option is maybe replace something every year. Maybe you do keep something every 3 or 4 years, but you kind of go in a rotation cycle, so you keep your equipment, a fair amount of time. Maybe not, you don't replace it as frequently as you do here, but you do replace something every year. This strategy is good from a cash flow perspective because it tends to even that out, and you can typically finance your purchases basically from your operating capital, so you may not actually have to go out and actually take any loans out to buy your equipment here, but it does mean you're probably replacing something before it actually wears out. So it may be replaced before you normally would consider doing it here. The third option, I would argue most farmers probably in the US probably practice this strategy, and this is you replace when cash is available. So if you're having a really good year, you replace a lot more of your equipment. If you go through some periods of bad years, you replace a lot less. The disadvantage for that, though, is that some equipment you replace while it still has some life left. Some equipment, you may be replacing it when it's really probably a little bit older than you would like to keep it here. But as from a cash flow perspective, this is probably really one of the better strategies because it does match up the equipment purchases with your income, and you match it with how much cash you have available. So I think most farmers make this one work pretty well. The last option would be basically to keep it forever, and you guys probably all know people like this who keep their stuff forever and ever. I know my dad bought one of the first Alice Chalmers no-till planters. You guys remember when those came out? 1972, I think, is when the first one came out. My dad had one of the first ones. It was a 6-row planter. He basically kept that planter for probably at least 40 years. He just got rid of it a couple years ago, actually. The problem with keeping it forever, though, is reliability issues, right? So the older it gets, the more trouble it can cause, and you really can't afford downtime. The one nice thing, though, about this Alice Chalmers 6-row no-till planter was it was just a plate planter, so it was easy to fix. There wasn't really, just replacing the chains and belts on it. It was good to go here. So really, reliability wasn't that big an issue here. But for a lot of the people who practice keep it forever, a lot of these farmers will actually have something kind of hidden away back in one of their back sheds somewhere that, if your planter does break down and you're practicing the keep it forever strategy, you can go out in the shed and pull this thing out of the weeds and make use of it. I know my dad had this no-till planter, but he also had 2 kind of toolbar planters too that he could pull out if need be here too. So that's the way most folks make that work. And you also forego probably the latest technology and some of those issues too here. Then we also have lease and custom hire things. Some questions to consider, though, in the whole scheme of things is how much it's going to cost, not only the dollar amount of what you're purchasing, but then go ahead and look at it on a per acre basis here. So this combine you're looking at, may cost $500,000, but then think about how many acres that's going to cover. And again, if I compare it with my Gleaner F with a new modern combine, the cost per acre actually may be pretty comparable, actually. Some other questions they ask, will it increase efficiency or profitability? Is there new technology I want to incorporate? If you're a younger farmer especially, this is something to consider and you have limited cash available is this the best place to put my money? If you're capital constrained, and I would argue probably a lot of young and beginning farmers are going to be in that category where the bank's not going to give them all the money they can use. If you have better places to put your money that can earn you a higher rate of return, then maybe you want to look at an option that won't require so much cash. Maybe look at leasing or custom hire to meet your equipment needs and put that money somewhere else. Can you afford it? Obviously, is going to be a big one. How's it going to impact your cash flow? You have to consider the tax considerations. And here's the biggest one I think you need to worry about is the whole reliability and timeliness issue. I would argue farmers really trade equipment from that perspective more than anything else. There's only a small harvest window. If you miss that window, you're kind of out of luck. Typically for corn, soybeans, you may only have 300 to 400 hours or less per year to get your crop out. So it's very important that you have a machine that's going to be reliable. The first thing, though, is make sure equipment's running well. This is a picture I took next to my little 8 acres there in Wamego. But you guys probably saw a lot of this here in southeast Kansas, right? A lot of corn growing up out in the field. Just maybe a function of the fall that we had. But it does indicate that you weren't getting all those kernels of corn into your combine here. For corn, if we consider 2 kernels per square foot, that equals 1 bushel per acre. My estimation of this was there was probably about 8 bushels of corn left out there in that particular field. Now, again, you're not going to be able to get all that, but if you do make a good job of making sure your equipment's adjusted properly, I think you can avoid at least some of this maybe. All right, so options to purchase. I think, again, this would be the preferred choice for most farmers because it does give you the most control. You can decide when you actually get out there and actually run that combine tractor, how it's run. You make sure you do a good job of getting it outdone. But the biggest disadvantage, though, is probably going to tie up the most capital. It's going to be the worst from the cash flow perspective. Some reasons to replace. Really, I think you look at cost minimization for that. The only problem with these cost minimization models is they tend to give a real wide range of when you actually might replace something, and the curve is very flat too. Let me show you an example of that. Here's something one of my master's students was working on was when to replace a harvester. He was looking at basically cost minimization. So the year when this cost would be at its minimum would be the year you want to replace a harvester. Well, in our particular example, it turned out that this number was about 18 years. This is typically longer than most farmers would keep their combines. The reason is because this particular models, when you just look at the repair costs and the depreciation costs, they don't really figure in reliability. Well, reliability is a difficult thing to quantify because it's different things for different people. Some people may be really stretching their equipment. Reliability is a big factor. Someone who has a bunch of excess machinery, like I said, some older equipment sitting around, is not such a big deal here. So putting a good cost on reliability is kind of a difficult concept. If you do that, you would actually get, I think, to a place where you would actually change your equipment probably quicker than you would otherwise just looking at those numbers I showed you. Some other reasons to replace. You may have saw some of this back in 2000, 2008, where net farm incomes really went high. You know, pride of ownership, a chance to get some new technology, keep up with your neighbors, you know, new capacity, things like that. And I'd already talked about some of the replacement strategies here. Let's look at some of the, besides the ownership thing, look at another alternative would be leasing your equipment. There's really two kinds of leases. There's operating leases and there's cash leases. I think Scott's going to address some of those issues here. I think for the most part, though, IRS is going to consider a lot of your leasing today to be a capital lease, where it's actually going to show up on the balance sheet as opposed to something you can just write off as an operating expense here. That may take away some of the advantages to the whole leasing situation. Another option is to rent. This is especially popular when you have a piece of equipment you only need for a short period of time. Like you guys have probably all driven past the rental places. You see a bunch of cherry pickers at a lot of these places. Well, you know, a cherry picker is something that you're really not going to buy or use very often, right? So it really doesn't pay anybody to buy one of those, but rental places can make good use of them because there's always probably somebody somewhere wanting to put up Christmas lights or something like that may need them here. So some problems with this, though, is the number of rental companies are kind of limited. I would say your average equipment dealer doesn't really want to get into the renting game necessarily. And you may need insurance to operate the machine. And plus, you're getting a machine you're probably not going to use very long, so you may not be a skilled operator actually using it. So that may be a disadvantage for it, too. Custom hire, I would say this is probably the second most popular option for farmers. Basically, you have someone come in and actually harvest or do whatever they're going to do with their particular machine. Those folks are experts on the machine. They probably have the most skill using it. You don't require any driver yourself. You're not responsible for any of the maintenance, though. But the biggest disadvantage, though, is there's less control over the timeliness and quality of work. And think about the incentives for using these machines. So if you're a farmer, you hire somebody, well, what's your objective for that operator, right? You want them to come in and do the best job they can on your crop. Well, if you're a custom operator, what's your incentive for operating that machine? Do you want to do the best job on that person's crop? I would say maybe a secondary option. I would say their first objective is to cover as many acres as they can in a day. That those two things may not give you the same result here. So keep that in mind whenever you look at custom hire stuff. This is a summary kind of from this Iowa State publication. There's two tools I'm going to talk about here in a second, but this kind of summarizes some of that. It's in your notes there, so I won't spend much time on that here. So kind of in summary, here are some ways we can get through this, I think, and it will really help on the cash flow side. Is first of all, consider the machinery you do have, and I'm guessing most of you guys probably have a little excess capacity right now. Look at that as a bank that you can draw down from to meet your cash flow needs going forward. Try to maintain what you do have, and that will become more and more important as your machines get older and older, is to make sure you do a good job maintaining and operating those machines. And then when you do need to buy something, and even in times like this, you're going to probably need to look at buying something here and there, is look at all options besides purchase. Certainly look at the rental and the custom operation side. There's a couple of tools from Iowa State that are good for making some of these comparisons. They have a lease versus purchase spreadsheet. Here's an example that Greg Regier worked out for me earlier this fall, showing some of the numbers you plug in. And then this spreadsheet basically gives you a cash flow per year and what the total costs are. It does that for the purchase and for the lease side, and then it does a comparison, and you can see which one would actually give you the best value. In this particular case, I think the lease side gives you the least cost option. But again, it all depends on your particular numbers here. So I can't give you a blanket number saying lease is better than purchase. It all depends on how much you're going to use the machine, how many acres you're going to cover, and some of the costs for leasing it versus leasing the machine versus actually going out and buying it here. So it's going to, again, depend on the individual operator's consideration. There's also a spreadsheet there looking at purchase versus custom hire. The thing I like about this spreadsheet is at the very end, it tells you how many acres you have to operate on your own to make purchasing the best option. So the rule of thumb basically is the more you're going to use that machine, the more generalized that machine is, the more likely you are to purchase it. So things like tractors, where you can cover a whole different crops, you can use at multiple locations on your farm. Most farmers are going to own their tractors, right? But when you start moving to the combine side of things, harvesting, less likely because you don't use that machine as much. And even when you get to the spraying side, where you have to have a rig come in and spraying, you're less likely to own those kind of things as well. Some other things to consider, joint ownership might be something to look at too, where maybe you and your neighbor farmer consider owning something in tandem. This would have been a great option for my dad before he retired, because we're only farming 500 acres in Southern Illinois. He has a good friend who's almost the exact same size farmer. Trouble is, they don't really make a farm equipment anymore, especially on the combine side, where that combine will fit 500 acres, right? I mean, that's way too small of a farm for that one combine. But if my dad and his neighbor would have combined together and bought a combine, one combine, that would have been perfect for their two operations. The trouble is, as you guys know, farmers tend to be an independent bunch trying to buy equipment together. My dad was like, oh, I don't know. He's my best friend, but I don't know if I can really trust him or not. So you guys have probably seen issues like that. Another option is to rent out machinery. This would work better though, like if you were in different parts of the state, maybe north-south wise, where someone down south would use your equipment before someone further up north. But again, trying to get farmers to join together and do those kind of things may be a little bit problematic. But it is something to consider anyway, especially in this kind of cash flow situation. So any comments or questions? No? All right. Let's see. Who's after me now? Is it Art? I can tell you here. I guess it is Art. Did Art vanish on me? All right.
You have these spreadsheets available on the rent and lease options?
We didn't know if we could actually post Iowa State stuff, but if you go to the, where's that at here? Right here. You can download it from the Iowa State site. Thought you ran out from me, Art.
Get two of them.
Got two of them?
Yep. Alan did real good flipping one to each side of his tie. And then shoving them.
Okay, is that on?
That's on.
Okay.
This one's on.
Okay. Guy could get electrocuted with this and get up. All right. I can't see anything from there. Okay, I get to visit with you a few minutes about the commodity title and explain why you may not have gotten the size of payment that you were really expecting. We did farm bill meetings across the state. Michael Taylor was out there with myself. She left before I gave you the bad news. So anyway, I didn't want to leave any doubt too that I'm here representing Kansas State University. If you'll notice the tie and the purple shirt, I did not want to be confused with anything that's to the east of us. As you know, they finally won a football game. They beat Texas. That didn't really impress me. That was the only team that Nebraska couldn't beat. So at this point, they want to talk basketball. We'll talk basketball later, okay? This currently, Kansas wheat prices are under the national average price. And as a result, the government payments have kicked in, but they are still higher than cash prices. And so people are wondering why we're not getting as big a check as they thought they might. The other thing is that part of that crop got put under loan, and it hasn't come into those cash prices. In 9 months, those loans are going to start to expire somewhere around April. And when they do, what's going to happen at that point? Most likely that wheat will get put on the market. So we may not have even seen the low at this point as those production numbers start coming into full play. The most important thing up there is bullet point number 4. And that is if you have some wheat base and you're getting LDP payments, those LDP payments are as high or been over 40 cents. We hit 40 cents twice and now we're backing down again. But those could be sizable payments. And those LDP payments count in the total for all farm programs. So your PLC payments, ARC payments that you may get next fall will be included with the LDP payments that you're getting now. So if you use up a bunch of your payment limit with LDP payments, that means you're going to be able to collect less from the payment next fall. And right now you don't know how big that payment's going to be, but that's especially for people who enrolled in the PLC program as opposed to ARC. If you are in PLC, I'm currently estimating that payment at $1.77 for wheat. So that's a pretty sizable number. And the grain sorghum is close to $1. Again, it's going to be a pretty sizable number. And if you're in that position, you are going to use a lot of that 125 limit for those payments that won't happen until next fall. Now, you can avoid calculating or counting the LDP payments in that 125 limit by paying the loan off with generic certificates. And FSA sent out a letter, and supposedly you all were told this when you came in, that you could use certificates. And what that does for you is 2 things. Number 1, it eliminates the means test, so you don't have a means test. So if your adjusted gross is greater than 900,000, then you can still collect the LDP payment by using certificates. The way this works is you take out the loan. There is more paperwork involved, and I think there's some filing fees, but you actually take out the loan, and then there is a cash flow issue because you have to pay the loan off with certificates. You can do this all in the same day, or at least that's what FSA says. I've been challenged by a few farmers whether you can actually do it in one day. As one person put it, yeah, probably in one day if the elevator's across the road from the FSA office. You can get it done one day. But nonetheless, you can do it in a very short time period. Now, these certificates, you have to write a check for them, the full amount. So there is a cash flow issue because you're going to have to write a check for the certificates, and then the certificates, you're going to turn right around and hand it back to the same person at the FSA office to clear out the loan. And then your loan proceeds won't show up in your checking account probably for a week to 10 days later. Depends on how quick the paperwork goes through. So there could be a time window in there where your check's probably going to clear before you actually get the government payment. But nonetheless, that's a real advantage because you're going to not have any of those dollars counted at 125 limit, and your payments next fall could be very large. So if you're in that situation, bullet point 4, and you didn't know this, bullet point 4 made it worth your trip here today, because that will save you some serious money. Loan rates are set at the local county level. They change across the state. The price loss coverage program is triggered by the marketing year average price and counts for prices across all regions. I always get questions about how do you get that price so high. The ARC payments are triggered by the marketing year average loan and the county yields. The county yields are really hard to come up with, the only place, and they're provided by USDA, and I always get questions about how they come up with them. On the marketing year average price, this is the official definition right here, is supposedly they get the survey of the large grain buyers, the ADMs and the Cargills of the world, And then they have to report two things: the total amount of bushels of corn or total amount of bushels of wheat that they bought during the month, and the total dollars that they paid for those. And then they survey the smaller groups, okay, the smaller elevators. They don't all have to report, but the big ones have to report every month. They take the total bushels from all these sources, total dollars paid, divide the two numbers, and that's how they come up with the national average price. Right now, I was in Garden City a week ago, and the cash price for wheat a week ago in Garden City was $2.55. The national average price that I'm now forecasting is at $4.73. Excuse me, $3.73. $3.73. But $3.73 is a long ways from $2.55. And so people want to know, well, how can you come up with that number? Well, there are other places in the U.S. that grow wheat. Northern Plains, Montana, the Washington state area, and prices are higher there than what they are here in Kansas. So that's how you can end up with a number that looks really out of place. These are the estimates that we publish every month, and we update them every month. This is for corn. There's only two numbers in there at this point that have been published by USDA, and it's those two right there. All these other numbers are estimates from K-State, and here is the estimated weights. What this weight is what percentage of the crop is sold in each month. Now, they are estimates, but it turns out these numbers are normally very stable, and the reason is that you don't change your marketing very much from year to year. However you're selling your crop is probably the way you're going to do it next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So notice that when you get down here after you get past January, these percentages get much smaller. So even if you've got an error here, it doesn't hurt the average very much because it's such a small number here. As a result, by the time we get the January number plugged in, you'll notice that the high months in terms of weights are October, November. You skip December because you don't want to pay taxes, right? And it comes in January, a bigger weight is typical. And once you get these numbers here, these next three numbers, once those come in, this number will become very stable. And that 335 estimate is what you're paid on. So that's where the corn's at right now. The sorghum and the soybean prices are in the handout material. Moving on to wheat. Wheat, we're feathering along. The marketing year starts June 1. And these numbers here are all final, published by USDA. Here are the weights over here. Notice that in the case of wheat, half the crop is sold in the first 3 months of the marketing year. We're well into the first 3 months of the marketing year, and now you notice that these numbers get fairly small, these weights. And again, they don't change a lot from year to year. And so even if we're off on the price estimate, we're not going to miss the 373 very far. We're probably within 2 or 3 cents of what that final number is going to be. And that's what determines the size of your government payment, if any. It's a national average price, and parts of the country are over $4. A part of the Kansas crop that's under loan is not going to show up in that survey because it hasn't been sold. I use the Chicago contract to drive the model to estimate this because it's national wheat, not just Kansas City hard red winter wheat. I've also adjusted for the wider basis. The current estimate is 373. Because there's more than 3 NAS wheat prices, it's expected that that number is going to be very near the final 373. And if it's not, you'll probably send me a note telling me I missed it, right? You'll remind me if it's not. But I'm telling you, I've got a lot of confidence I'm going to be close to the final number. Close is plus or minus a nickel. If it's $1, then something's screwy. Current cash prices versus market-wide year average is wider than normal. This is comparing that national average price with the cash price in Colby. Now, in Colby, notice that there are years here where the cash price in Colby was actually higher than the national average price. Why didn't we hear about that? We're all complaining when the cash price is lower than the national average price, but there have been years when the cash price has actually been higher than the national average price. So why didn't anybody complain? Anybody remember what wheat was selling for back in these time period? $7, $8? Remember that? Well, when it's at $7 or $8, how much you get in government payments? Nothing. So nobody paid any attention because nobody cared about the number. because it didn't mean anything. Now, we're on the other side where we are triggering payments, and it is true, the cash price is running below the price in Colby. And I don't have this chart is a little old, need to get it updated again, but about 60 cents under that national average price is where the price is at in Colby, as far as the cash is concerned. Again, the cash doesn't matter, it's whatever that national average price is that determines the payments. So, will 2016-17 PLC payments exceed ARC? I know most of you in corn country signed up for ARC. Likely many counties will generate no ARC payments even with low prices, and that's because they got, quote, high yields. Now, that's strictly how you want to define high yields, but that's pretty much how it works. It is correct that the high county revenue eliminates the ARC payment, but that is the way the ARC was designed. And so that brings down the question, why did one county get paid and another not? Anybody ask that question? Y'all got paid the same down here? Or did it vary? If you're in the right county, you'll find they're across the road, they got the maximum payment, and in the county you're standing, they got 0. Where does FSA get their county yields? Anybody ever want to know the answer to that? I get asked that all the time. This is the official story. They get their county yields by taking the total production in the county based on the NASS survey, okay? And they divide that by harvested acres plus failed acres. The failed acre number comes from RMA, and that's not a public number. The other numbers are all public, published, and you can look and see what they are, okay? Now, where do they get the NASS yield from? They send you out a survey, right? Anybody get that survey? We got a lot of counties that don't have NASS yields. That's the first problem. Why don't they have NASS yields? They send you a survey, and you take that survey and you go right to your office, you pull out your records, and you fill that out right down to the 1/10 of a bushel, right? Is that what you do? Or do you throw it in the round file? Most of you throw it away. And if not enough people report back, then there is no county yield produced for that county. And then FSA has to use the county committee, pull a number out of the air. They can talk to RMA, but one agency usually doesn't want to talk to another agency, so you run into that issue, etc. Now, the other question I get, and no one's asked it yet, but I get it elsewhere, why are they using survey data? Why don't they just use the yields reported to RMA? And what's the difference? Well, what's the penalty for not filling out the survey? Nothing. What if you take the penalty, and I know I grew up just 50 miles west here, so I know how you guys think down here. How do you fill out that survey? Well, this is none of the damn government's business. I'm going to screw with them. So when it asks for my corn yield, I don't write down I got 150 bushels. I write down I got 400 bushels. Yeah, let them figure that one out and send it back in. Or I write down I got 0, even though I got a normal yield. Send that in. Those are outliers. I can tell you right now, don't waste your time. They will toss those out. If they're outside a certain statistical range, they will figure that somebody's just messing with them and they'll throw it away. On the other hand, what happens if you don't fill out those crop insurance yields correctly? They are filled out with criminal liability attached. A real case in North Carolina, I know you guys wouldn't do that here, but this is in North Carolina. Situation was he had tomato plants and he decided that it was worth more in insurance than what he could sell the tomatoes for. So he sent his employee to town to pick up cocktail ice at the local supermarket. They brought him all the ice he could buy, threw all the ice on the tomato plants, and then he had the employee take a broom and go down the rows of tomato plants and beat them over. And then he filed a claim. It turns out that employees are not real loyal when facing jail time. Really. I can't believe it myself, but he turned evidence pretty quick and agreed to testify on behalf of the government. Ladies, listen up. Her story was, I have no idea what the old man was doing. He just told me I had to sign the paper here. I don't have anything to do with the farm. I don't understand any of this. I just signed the paperwork. She got 48 months in the big house with Big Bertha as her roommate. And he got 72 months in the big house with Big Bubba as a roommate. So if you don't want Big Bubba as a roommate, I suggest you fill those reports out correctly. And if you're the one signing them, you might want to ask hubby what he's up to when you're signing them, because they weren't buying her story. They simply said, no, you're legally bound too. So there's a real incentive to figure those out accurately. When you get in some parts of the state, west of 35, virtually 100% of the acres are insured as far as wheat is concerned. Now, in this part of the world where wheat's kind of a secondary crop or a noxious weed, I've never quite figured out which, you don't necessarily all insure that. But certainly in a lot of counties, you could, even here, I bet it's probably 60, 70% of the acres are insured. And the thing is, that's a much larger survey than what you're going to get from a mail-in survey, much larger number of observations. So you would think there would be somebody with some math skills that could figure out statistically what the county yield is looking at the numbers coming from RMA. Why don't they do that? Well, the people that work at NASS don't really want you to do that because that's their job. You're not allowed to shrink the size of the USDA. Trump says he's going to shrink agencies. We'll see. I didn't say he wouldn't. I didn't say he didn't want to, but I can tell you it's very difficult. We closed a few FSA offices. You remember that? Probably been 15 years ago now. And then we created this thing, most complicated farm program they ever came up with, and now they don't have enough people to operate it. So, the way it is. As I said, a number of counties don't have yields because farmers don't return the surveys. If Michael was here, she'd tell you, well, that's your fault. You should have returned them. She can say stuff like that and get away with it because I know you guys won't hit a girl, but if I said that to you, you'd probably get mad at me. You might punch me for telling you this is your fault for not mailing it in. But on the other hand, I buy the argument of why not just use the RMA data. It's there. They got access to it. The FSA's county yield also may not account for corn silage, wheat pasture, seed corn split with the irrigation and dry land acres. That doesn't always get sorted out correctly. So I get all those kinds of questions. How are they handling this? And the answer is they probably really don't. They make a judgment call. Crop insurance yields, as I said, were reported with criminal liability, and there's a bunch of different county yields for different programs, and they don't necessarily have the same number. Now, looking forward, first of all, if you're in PLC and ARC, it's a pretty straightforward program. The estimated payment for wheat is $1.77 with PLC, and that's times your individual farm's program yield. If for corn, it's 35 cents. That's where we set today. If you're on Ag Manager, we update these each month so you can see exactly. We'll get better with the price number, and we'll have pretty much what your payment's going to be, or at least you can figure it. With this program, you not only have to know the price, but you also have to know the yield. Now, Robin here says that USDA is going to report county yields today for wheat, right? And she believes USDA. I don't. I'll believe it whenever I see it. So if it is out there, we will be updating the maps I'm going to show you with whatever the county yield is, and it will be wheat. They definitely won't have corn at this point. But they've never put wheat numbers out this early before, so I'm a little surprised. And you got to remember, some of that wheat is spring wheat too, so I wonder, it may be just winter wheat that they put out. I would almost think it'd have to be. So, to give you the maximum information possible, we have maps on the site created by Robin. So all you have to do is put your cursor over the top of your county that you're interested in. And this stuff all pops up on the screen. And for example, what it's telling you is you can have a yield that's 19.4% greater than the average yield and still get the maximum payment. So the yield has to be below that number. The long run average yield is 41.4. This is our estimate of the Olympic average price, and frankly, that's going to be right. That's the final number. And then this is the Olympic average yield. That's that 5-year Olympic average yield we're going to talk about in a minute. This is the projected price. That is our estimate, 373. This means with this price estimate and the data in this county, the trigger yield is 58 bushels. So you have to have a yield below 58 to trigger any payment. The average is 41. The 5-year Olympic average is 37.7. But your yield could be as high as 58 bushels and still get a payment. The yield will need to be below 51.4 bushels to get the maximum payment of $25.24 in that county. So if you're wanting to know what the payments are likely to be for your farm, what you need to do is go on the site and put this over your crop. It's by crop, so we've got corn, sorghum, soybeans, and you put that cursor over the top and it will give you this information. And what you have to decide is, if you farmed in this county, do you think your yield is going to be below 51 bushels? And we think you know more about your county yield than we do. So rather than us try to estimate or guess at what the county yield is, we plug in this information and you have to make the choice. Do you think it's going to be below 51? And if you were from that county, you probably have some idea how good or bad the yields were, okay? Now, if they do come out with these yields that Robin has promised, they will be updated into the model itself. And so for wheat, at least, you will be getting a much closer estimate of what the payment's going to look like. Now, why didn't I get paid? It's all tied back to this yield. When we did Farm Bill meetings, I did go over this yield thing, but do I think most farmers really understood what we were telling them? And my answer is, I don't think you really did grasp all the details. What it amounts to, it's a 5-year Olympic average yield. So if you have more, 2 or more loss years in that history, then you ended up with a very low guarantee. Because when you throw out the high and low, that means you're only going to average 3 years. And if 1 or 2 of those yields are bad, you got a really low average, and that makes your revenue guarantee really low, and therefore no payment, okay? So in this county, the plug yield is 29 bushels. That's 70% of the long run average. 29 bushels is the plug. This is the history: 48, 43, 36, 41, 49. You throw out the high, and then you throw out the low. Now, the distribution here is not as good as you'd like, because you're going to lose this 48 bushels here. It's a pretty high yield, second highest up there. You're going to lose that in the very next year. So you'd be much better off if you had the 2 big yields right here. 49, 41's not bad, but you had 49 and 48 here, and if you had the 36 over here in 09, that'd be a perfect distribution for getting the most payments out of ARC, okay? And the average yield, Olympic average, is 44. Next year, we had a bad yield in 2014. In fact, it was below the plug, so the plug goes in. That is the low yield, and it does drop out. We also drop out the high, and remains these 3 years, and we're about to lose another good yield out of the distribution. Look what happened to our average. It dropped, making the guarantee even less in 2015. Now, you want the rest of the bad news? The price is coming down too, the Olympic average price. So you got a lower Olympic average price and a lower Olympic average yield. Multiply the 2 numbers together. Robin, you got a lower guarantee, right? She graduated first in her class, so I have to check with her. She's one of our students that we recruited out of Wisconsin, but we've got her pretty well straightened out. 29 bushels gets struck again in this year. 49 goes. The 36 gonna, one of these 36, this 36 is gonna drop off next year. Now our Olympic average yield has dropped down to 38. So fortunately, we're guessing, we don't know this number, but everybody says the wheat yields were just super off the chart in Western Kansas. So we said, well, let's assume that their yield in this year is as good as the previous one, which is 49. So that's where the 49 came from, is we're saying it matched the previous high, and it won't matter in this particular year because that gets dropped off anyway. So that brought it, but that actually improved our yield back up, raised it back up some, came back up to 42. But in the meantime, the price dropped even more. When we get to 2018, the last year of the Farm Bill, you're going to drop those 2 yields out. I assume somewhere around an average yield for 17, and our yield, Olympic average yield, remains the same, okay? Now, this is the state of Kansas, and you'll notice down in this part of the state, you can have a yield that's about 40% higher than your average and get the maximum payment. So unless your wheat yields are really good, what we're telling you is that there's a pretty good chance that some of you are going to get ARC payments on the wheat. Ever see how that works? The darker the green, the more likely. Out here, they got to have a yield that's not only below average, it actually has to be below average in order to collect anything. Because see, these are negative numbers out here in some of these counties. So moving on to corn, the news is not so good. See, your numbers are negative. So you not only have to have a yield that's below, low, it has to be below average by at least 12% in Wilson County to get the maximum payment. Okay? So we're not real optimistic. And then they split irrigated and dry land out. This is the irrigated, and you probably don't really care about that in this part of the state. So looking at this, there's a few holes in the ARC program, right? Everybody agree with that? Few holes in the ARC program. So if you want to make changes in the ag policy, and I think the ARC program probably will be around, but there will be changes made. I don't know which direction they will go, but I expect changes to be made, but I expect it probably will still be out there. Where does the President of the United States visit when there's an ag issue? Does he come to Kansas? He goes to Iowa. And so that's why I'm using an Iowa example over the objections of everybody on the faculty. But I would argue this still needs this is the place to look at it, because if you can't show how it affects Iowa, then whatever the policy is not going to be changed. Why does the president go to Iowa? The short answer is those folks in Iowa, they go both ways. I'm talking politically, not what you're thinking. Yeah. One year they'll vote Democrat, next year they'll vote Republican. And those 7 electoral votes in a close election make a difference. What's the last time Kansas voted for a Democrat? Anybody know? 1964, Lyndon Johnson. Yeah. Have you heard the old story? You vote for Lyndon, you'll end up in Nam. I voted for Lyndon, and that's where I went. Never heard that? No? No, okay. Yeah, I'm the only one that's old enough to remember Lyndon Johnson. That's the problem. Anyway, I said it before you had a chance to, Robin. Anyway, Iowa examples, very simply, is Northern Iowa received a lot of payment, Southern Iowa, none. Why? And it really didn't provide shallow loss coverage either. That was one of the things it was supposed to do. The key is number 4. If you have multiple county yields or year losses, then you're going to get smaller payments than otherwise would be the case. This number you can take home, and it's almost a guarantee that in your county, if your county's corn yield in 2018, the last year of the Farm Bill, if your county yield equals the Olympic average corn yield for that county, you're going to need a national average price under $3.18 to collect anything from ARC corn. So there's virtually no guarantee left in this program in 2018 for corn. $3.18, that's with an average yield. We don't know what that yield's going to be today. It could be low, and you get payments. I'm just saying, if it's average, what are you going to bet on other than average? There really isn't anything else to bet on. So, 318. Did farmers fully understand the methodology of ARC and PLC? Everybody who understood that went to a farm meeting on the Farm Bill, raise your hand that you fully understood what was going on. No one? Gee. Okay, how many didn't understand it? Let me try it that way. Maybe you're all asleep. Yeah. I went back and I checked my notes, and we actually did cover this Olympic averaging, but I don't think people really grasp how big an impact it really has, because it is the key. And it's why Northern Iowa was paid and Southern Iowa was not. Now, I could have picked counties in Kansas and showed you the same thing, but the plan is to get this written up so that it gets into the political debate. But look at Northern Iowa. These are the 2015 payments, and you can see there's a $92 payment there. If we had looked at 14, it was really dark green up in this area. Then look down here. None or very small payments. Senator Grassley and Joni Ernst, you all remember Joni? She was going to go to Washington and make them squeal. Remember the commercial? A couple of you do. Anyway, you probably got a chuckle out of it. She got her elected. Anyway, they wrote a letter to the Secretary of Ag, and they want to know, well, why did my farmers not get paid in southern Iowa? Well, the truth is they know the answer, but the way the game is played is you don't want to take credit for this outcome, so you write the secretary and you say, well, what did you guys do to screw up our perfect program that my farmers didn't get paid? That was the gist of the letter. But it's part of the game. You send it in, and then the senator can say, tell the folks back home, hey, I checked into this. I sent a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture, and I'm waiting for his response back. The answer is, it's all about the yield. I'm looking at Ringo County, which has got 0 for 2014. They also had 0 in 2015. So far, they've collected nothing out of this program, okay? Now, first thing, and these prices apply to the entire country, not just Iowa. But these are the corn prices. Here's the wheat and soybeans. You can do those on your own. But here is the reference price, 370. That's in the law. And then the actual prices were 355, 518, 622, 689, and 446. You throw out the high and the low, which is the 355, and it never drops below 370. And the 689 drop out, and you average the remaining 3 years. And so in 2014, you start out with a price of 270, was the actual price in 270, okay? And you subtract that from the 5-year Olympic average price, which is throwing out the high and low here to get to the 529. And that means you take 86% of that, we're at 455. And that's because we're taking off the deductible. Do the same thing in the other years, and these numbers are all final here. They have not changed. We're now at 479 because that price is starting to come down. This 335 is our current estimate. At 335, you take 85% or 86% of that, brings the price down to 412, and then that's multiplied times your county yield. Up here, I'm assuming that the price does not turn around, that we're still at 370 in 2017 or less. And then I'm assuming the market does get better by the time we get to 18. If true, you work through the numbers, and here's the number I was talking about. By the time you get to 2018, if you got a yield in your county equal to the Olympic average, then you need a cash price below 318. In 17, it's going to have to be below 340 to trigger any payment. This last year in particular, hard to argue there's any safety net left when it comes to corn. It's a little better on wheat. You'd need a price below 487 with an average yield to trigger a payment. Anyway, moving forward, those are the prices that we are using. Here are the yields for that county. 93 is their plug, so you divide that by 0.7, you will get their long run average, which was 133 bushels. Notice that their best yield is right here in 2009, and it's going to drop out in the first year. Worst distribution you could have. And then you got 2 plugs in here. They got a bad yield in 10, and bad yield in 12, and not very good in 11. So 3 out of the 5 yields are bad. And that's going to give you a very low average as a result of that. And when we plug that number in, we end up with a 110. You work through the math, and these numbers are all final. The payment is 0. 2015, numbers are all final, but with a 120, 10 average, because of this distribution, we're down to 0. And 2016, I assume that we got a high yield, 166. That was the best we've had. That's because USDA said the yields were good. If they really are that good, that would be the number that would go in. And of course, that 166 is going to get dropped out in the next year anyway. But you look down these numbers again. These are prices of 335 is forecasted. The 166, what's in red is a forecast. The rest of the numbers are final. But where it looks at right now, it very much looks like the payment is in fact going to be 0. If we have an average yield in the last 2 years of the Farm Bill and the prices don't improve, they're going to be looking at 0 and 0. Now, I submit they're not going to be very happy because they went through a 5-year program and got nothing out of it. Got nothing out of it. And that's why I think there probably will be an ARC program, but I think there's going to be changes made because there are going to be some unhappy campers out there when you look nationally who didn't get paid. Okay. The ARC program is a revenue guarantee, so if the county had a higher yield than their expected or average, then it eliminated the payment, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Multiple year losses drive down the 5-year Olympic average yield. That's what went on in Ringgold County. And then you kind of ask the question, is that 5-year Olympic average yield, does that represent normal yield for Ringgold County? And I would submit it really doesn't. I would submit that the 133 is the more normal number. Anyway, because of the way the math works, if you buy in that the Olympic average is their expected yield, which I'm claiming I don't think that's correct, but if that is your argument, then ARC works exactly the way you intended it to, and you weren't supposed to get paid. But if it's an average yield, then the average yield is 133. You work off of that number, they would not have gotten a payment in 14, but they would have gotten a payment in 15. So if the ARC is not effective coverage, one alternative is just buy higher crop insurance coverage. Can you do that? The answer is no, you can't. How much time I got? I'm 10 minutes over? Well, good enough. I'll finish up then. There's the wheat combined payments for 2015. Those are the corn payments. And these are the payments. And again, these are in your handout material, so you can look at them real quick yourself. If a farmer's had do-overs, I'm guessing soybeans would stay right where they're at with ARC because PLC has paid nothing. They would take PLC on sorghum. If they'd have known the market was going to fall apart on wheat, they would have been in PLC, and if they had a do-over, they'd switch to PLC today. Corn would still be a mixed bag. That's going to depend on the county, whether you'd prefer to be in ARC on corn or in PLC. So that's going to come down to what the county guarantee is and what the county yield is. When farmers signed up with acre, I would argue they were more concerned about drought and a crop loss than they were a bumper crop when we got the opposite of bumper crop. The marketing year average price does not account for the basis, nor does crop insurance. So this is not your local cash price. There is nothing to cause the marketing year average price to converge with the local cash. And a return to normal wheat crop production will likely cause convergence between futures and cash. What we're talking about there is a problem with the wheat contract. We are not getting convergence between futures and cash. And I guess we're going to have another conference call with CFTC. We've been asking questions and ticking off the wrong people. But it is a real problem from a marketing standpoint if you don't have futures coming together at cash during delivery points. The closest, and this is a wheat problem, but it can happen in the other commodities too. If you want more information on that, it's on agmanager.info. They are videotapes. Oh, you got sheet. I got one too. They are on videotapes. The other thing is I'm going to pass around a yellow sheet. I had another sheet. I thought of it, but thank you. If you would like to be on our email list so that you get a note every time we update the website, just leave me an email address. I'm going to pass this around. If you don't want to hear from us, don't put your email on here. This is only if you want to hear from us. And I guarantee you, you will hear from us. If you don't hear from us, then we've lost your email somewhere. What you'll get is notices like when I said we update the estimates of the payments on the wheat. When we get county yields, we fill in those and we publish new maps. You'll get a note that it's been updated. When I update those prices on the marketing year average price, you're going to get a note when it's been updated. The advantage is that you don't have to go out there and hunt for it. And there'll be other things on there too, like livestock prices, etc. If it's something you're interested in, you click on it, it'll take you right to it. You don't have to hunt for it. That's the advantage. And on the other hand, you don't have to check every day to see if something new has been put out there that you're interested in. So with that, I'm done. Do you want me to tell a story before I leave? I could talk about KU basketball real briefly. I always get grief about why can't K-State get a good team that can beat KU? And the answer is that at KU, not only do they get the best players, but they stay till they're seniors because if they turn pro early, they have to take a pay cut. Now you can't just go out there and write these kids a check. You got to be really creative in how you do it. And one of the ways you do it is that you get them a job with an alumni where they don't have to work very hard, but they pay them really well. By the way, if I'm offending somebody from KU, I don't give a damn. But in any case, you got to be creative. Anyway, they got this kid, one of their ball players they got from New York City, and they got him a job in a pickle factory, the cucumbers being processed into pickles. So he arrives at the plant, and the manager, the foreman showing him around, and he's not real happy with this kid anyway, considers him, being well taken care of, doesn't really understand how hard you have to really work in the world, etc. But, he's still the foreman, and the boss says, we're going to put this kid on the payroll. And what he was told was, this plant's completely automated. And he told the kid, the only thing you got to do here is sit and watch the line. If it jams, you reach up and you turn off the power, and you don't put your hands on any equipment. Keep your hands off of it. You call maintenance, they'll come clear the machine. But don't touch the equipment. Just turn the power off. That's all you got to do. Well, about 3 weeks later, he was down on Mass Street in Lawrence, where all the KU students go to drink beer. And he was having a beer in the bar, and he looked really down. The bartender asked him what was wrong. I said, well, I got fired today. He said, oh, really? What'd you get fired for? Well, I put my hand on the pickle slicer. And the bartender said, well, that seems like kind of a really tough standard to fire somebody for putting their hands on the pickle slicer. He said, well, it's only fair. They fired her too. Come on, Robin, that was funny. You laugh for me, if nobody else is. Great site. Come watch it. We'll give you our best shot. You can. I probably won't answer it. Go ahead. Oh, it doesn't look that way. Nope. No. But it messes up the whole program. You need the whole country in it. That's what the is all about. The bigger the pool, the better it works.
So we're not doing that bad on our yields in comparison.
We can tell where you're at in Iowa. There's some very good yields in Iowa. There's some very good. I mean, his time. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Scott Laird. I am with the Kansas State's Farm Management Association in the Southeast region. My office is actually in Ottawa, and we have 3 offices in the Southeast region. And some of my colleagues in farm management put this presentation together, and I get to be the one to deliver it to you today. Can you hear me all right? I'm getting a little back, but okay. Basically the last month, I have been meeting with my farm clients and looking at their income and expenses and trying to help them plan for their taxes to see where they're at. And so, nice thing about K-State, they're trying to prepare us for low income. Now I'm mostly, my clients are mostly, I'd say, East Central Kansas. Do you think I'm dealing mainly with low income or high income? Want to take a guess? Fortunately, we're not dealing with too much low income yet. So maybe we're a year ahead. Maybe we're just lucky. Who knows? We try to stay prepared, but as some of you probably know, when you get 50 or 60 bushel wheat beans, it helps keep things from being too bad, right? So So fortunately, unless, there's always situations, the cattle market certainly is a drag. So there's some negatives, but fortunately not too bad. But there may be, hopefully there's a nugget, or there's some things here that we might want to think about as we move forward. Again, maybe next year this will be more applicable. But we certainly have realized everybody wants to get the plan when they know they have high income, but planning in low income years is just as important. A lot of things to consider, and in a nutshell, we'd say we don't want to leave anything on the table. There are credits out there. There are some tax traps that come along. And so we'll just kind of try to talk about a few of these items today. First of all, before we do that, just to give you a couple of updates on some things you may or may not have heard about. First of all, some of you had kids that went to college or have kids in college, and you had to fill out the FAFSA. That's worse than taxes, right? One good thing, and I hope this works as well as I hope as a tax preparer, now you don't have to be in quite as much rush, because they will look back at last year's taxes and you can use that to fill out the FAFSA. So nice. That takes some pressure off you and some pressure off us. I hope that works out well. Also, there are a few changes in deadlines this year. If you do 1099s or W-2s, those have to actually be filed with the government by January 31st. That's got our office a little nervous, but whether you do it yourself or someone else, we've got to watch that one. Also, if you have a partnership, that used to be due in April, that is now due March 15th. So, and trusts as well. As I see that, I got to remember that those trusts are due a month earlier. So little change in our scheduling. To maybe correspond with that a little bit, if you have a C Corp or involved with the corporation, that has moved back to April 15th. So again, a little bit of a shift there. As far as some tax brackets and some of the basic tax information, kind of see where we're at here in 2016 and where we're headed for 2017. 2016 has been a very quiet year. They passed the tax bill at the end of 15, and so we've just kind of been able to ride through 16. And a couple things we may want to remember as we go forward: standard deduction of about $12,600 for a married couple, and personal exemptions of $4,000. So each married couple has about $20,700 of income you can earn without having any taxable income. So that's always kind of a key thing that we look at. We've got the $500,000 Section 179 deduction that you can use for purchased capital, and 50% bonus on new items. And then the tax brackets which were just tweaked. And then here's kind of where we're headed, just again, some tweaks mostly for 2017. Now, what's it sound like is going to happen in 2017 in general? This may all change. By the time we're looking at 2018, who knows? I assume they won't get this. This won't happen fast enough to affect 17 too much. But I know talk of taking away exemptions, but bumping up your standard deduction to like $30,000. Going to maybe just 3 tax brackets, for instance. Those things are all out there. We'll see where it goes. It's really too soon to say or maybe to get too concerned about the details, but certainly looks like there will be some good changes or major changes, whether they're good or bad, I guess we'll see. But that's where we're headed. On the Kansas side, a couple things. Many of you remember last year there was pretty big fires down in Barber and southwest Kansas. And so there is a special provision to replace fences that were damaged by that fire. Another little thing, even though I just showed you those changes in the federal deadlines, Kansas hasn't necessarily changed their deadline. Their partnership deadline still is April 15th. So it makes it just a little quirky, but shouldn't be a big deal. And tax brackets for Kansas, just 2 tax brackets, 2.7 and 4.6. And then they have thrown in a new low income exclusion where under 12.5 of taxable income, they won't tax that. So kind of tweaking what they were doing. One of the big issues, and this is a pretty simple concept, but with some complex calculations and ramifications maybe, is a net operating loss. One of the things that we would like to avoid. An NOL, again, simple, it's created when deductions exceed income. So we've got more expense, more deduction than income. That may be the start of an NOL. NOLs aren't good because, in a nutshell, you would have unused deductions that are available to you. Remember when I said you've got $20,700 you can make without paying any tax, right? So you'd like to use that. Beyond that, you've got a 10% tax bracket. Doesn't necessarily factor into the NOL, but we want to use those things that don't cost us too much. We want to manage your self-employment tax, Social Security tax. If we have an NOL, we're not using that stuff that's sort of given to you. And so that's what we kind of want to avoid. An NOL is created, could be through any of these things. If you have some non-farm business we run on Schedule C, certainly the Schedule F that we're mostly concerned with, and a couple of other casualty and theft, a couple other things that can come in there and start to lead to an NOL. How are they created? Well, I look at it, if I look at these top three, to kind of understand it, if you have negative farm income, that may be the start of an NOL. You have a negative Schedule F. That, however, is not necessary, that in itself is not an NOL. That has to also lead to negative taxable income. Because along with your Schedule F, you may have some cattle or machinery sales, you may have off-farm income. But if all of that is added in and you still have negative taxable income, you might have an NOL, but not always, because there's where the formulas start to kind of kick in. They will add back in some of your deductions, your personal deductions, things even like the domestic production deduction that you may have gotten. They will add that back in. So it may look like at first on paper you have a loss, but you may not officially have an NOL. So that's where it starts to get a little bit complicated. But if after all that we still have more deductions than income, we have an NOL. And by default, that is carried back 5 years. That's the standard default mechanism. So you can go back, you look back 5 years. If you had positive income, we can move that NOL back and subtract that from the positive income, and then go to the year 4 if there's still some NOL left, year 3, and we just step through the process and try to use up that loss that has been generated. If you do that for 5 years and it's still not consumed, you can then carry it forward for 20 years. So again, after that you lose it. Hopefully we don't get to that point. That's what we want to avoid. But you can elect to instead of using the 5-year carryback, to just go back 2 years instead of the 5 years. So if you'd had some good income in a couple years back and then have a loss, that certainly might be something you want to look at. Or you can say, if income hasn't been that great, you've got this loss, you may just want to carry it forward 20 years and use it as a deduction in the coming years. Any of those or as you can see, a combination will work. Now, it can be, certainly something you want to look at. If we can avoid the NOL, great. If we can, then the strategy kind of changes. So we want to go back 5 years, 2 years, whatever. But it can be well worth your time to look at it, because obviously if you take a loss back into some years, you've had positive income, you've paid taxes, we can use that loss, reduce what was the positive income, and that sets a whole chain of things in motion. And again, that's where it continues to be complicated. But because now if you don't have as much income and you had Social Security, for instance, maybe less of that's taxable. Maybe because you had positive income, you had used Section 179 2 years ago. Now you've got an NOL you're putting back on that year. You didn't need the Section 179. You've got depreciation now that carries forward. So we really have to look, for all those 5 years, 2 years or 5 years or whatever time period we're looking at. But it can certainly generate a pretty positive tax situation. So I think that's the case where we'll try to make the best out of a bad situation. You know, we'd like to avoid the NOL, but if you get one, then we try to figure out how do we make the best use of it. This slide, kind of the whole gist of this is an NOL is inefficient, however. So that's partly why you'd like to avoid it. Every time we go back, unless it just works out right, where we can, especially if you go back 2 years and you have enough income to just offset that NOL, that's not so bad. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward, might help you. But if you have to go back and there's not enough income in that year to use it, it starts going through this process. And every time it goes to another year, you lose some deductions that you would have had. So it's not very efficient to do it. You're not using the exemptions that you would have had. And so some of it's wasted. So try to avoid an NOL if you can. No, that's the best thing. I had, been meeting with clients. I'm sure this client that I'm thinking of didn't know we were giving this talk, but actually had the income potential, grain or cattle, but because of marketing, wasn't sure they wanted to sell. Well, I said, so what are you going to lose if you don't? If I don't sell this now, I think I can gain by waiting because some of this crazy basis and stuff that's out there. So I started in on first of all, there's these exemptions and deductions you're not using. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing was, what if you were 100,000 negative on your Schedule F and that was going to lead to an NOL, let's say? What's another big reason you might want to sell that 100,000 and at least get to zero? What are you not going to pay on that 100,000 that you could sell? Well, I guess I did mention it, but a big one is, of course, you're not going to pay any income tax for one thing, but you're also not going to pay any self-employment tax on that. You've got 100,000 to move into this year, and you're not going to pay anything on it, especially even self-employment tax. Doesn't mean that the marketing might still outweigh that, but that's on 100,000, that's $14,000 right there. So we talked about economists, we want to make a decision at the margin, and you're sitting there trying to decide, do I take this next 100,000? We want to try to consider as much as we can. So we try to avoid the NOLs. Well, how do we do that? Well, if we can plan ahead, here's where you have to think almost the opposite of everything I've been doing the last 5 years. Sell inventory, especially appreciated or low basis assets, machinery or something that's we've used a lot of expense. Now maybe we can move it in and get it as income. Typically, I'm talking to farmers about the advantages of doing a trade on the machinery. This is a case where maybe an outright sale is good. Get the money, get the cash, get the income. Treat CCC loans as income. Instead of a loan, take it as income. Get it in this year. Another kind of good one off the farm is if you, through the years, maybe have done some traditional IRAs, farmer gets to deduct it, and they're going to get taxed on it when they take it out. Well, if you know you have a low income year, good time to move that to a Roth, create that income now, then when you pull it out years later out of the Roth, it's not taxable. You've already dealt with it in a year when you needed the income. So that's a good one. And if you have an S Corp, you can distribute some assets or perhaps some earnings and profits that are sitting there. Again, usually everybody's trying to hold on to those. This is the case to get those out. If you can't plan ahead, if it kind of hits you, if you're December 15th, like today, that might be late. A common thing that we would try to at least discuss is if you've got some deferred contracts where you're planning on taking the cash after the first of the year, we can elect on the tax return to bring that income back into the current year. So that's a good one. That has to be done by contract, however. So if you got a big contract, one big contract. It's an all or nothing thing, but we certainly can do that. And again, there's some stuff with S corps. The other side of that, avoiding expenses, delay purchases or prepays if you can. If not, it starts to get tough, but we can capitalize if you've got some Lyme or some long-term fertility, you might be able to capitalize that. We can slow down and use a slower depreciation schedule to use as little as possible. And probably good at it. Again, I've always tried to talk to my clients. I see some big repair bills. A lot of times we're trying to decide if we should capitalize that. Here's a case where you might want to capitalize that. You don't need the expense. Stretch it out and use it next year when we hope we have some more income. Again, avoid them with NOLs if possible, and then use them as quickly as we can if you have one. That's kind of the gist of it. One other thing that also might tie together in a low income year, let's say especially a year where your Schedule F is negative. Again, that's not exactly the same as an NOL, but a negative Schedule F. What's a disadvantage of having that negative Schedule F is you do not generate you don't pay any self-employment tax. You are not putting anything into the Social Security system. And we can, I joke about that too. We all wonder how long that'll last or what's going to happen. But I think from a planning standpoint, it's what we have. It's kind of what we have to use. Well, farmers have an option. So if somebody is wanting to get credit for Social Security, we can use your gross income, plug that number in, and they will give you credit for $5,040 now of earned income. And by having that earned income, you are then creating for yourself $771 of self-employment tax. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you sort of voluntarily pay $771? As Greg said, farmers try to pay as little as possible. So why would you volunteer to do something? Okay. See, none of you would. See, you're just like my clients. I know. I have a hard time talking anybody into this. No, there are a few. Basically, to pay into Social Security, and I think a big one for farmers is to keep your Social Security disability current, so that if something happens, you are covered under the disability program. So forget maybe 20, 30 years down the road. What if something an accident or something this year? Are you up to date and have paid that in? So at least think about that. It will have no other impact on taxable income, just that $771. And this is a big one too, it may increase some of the credits that are available and allow for some deductions. Because you have self-employed income, now there's some deductions that kick in. And last year, we'll look at a couple key credits here in a second, but I know I had a client last year as I was going through, it had been a tougher year for them, and I was thinking, they're certainly not gonna owe anything. But I knew they wanted to pay into self-employment tax. So I did the optional method, gave them some self-employment tax, earned income credit kicks in, a couple other things kick in, and next thing you know, they don't just go from not owing. All of a sudden they're due they're getting a $5,000 refund. Something I wasn't thinking about it because again, everybody else, we were making good income. So there's just kind of some funny things that kick in. So speaking of those tax credits, there's a few I'll mention here. Earned income credit. It's a credit for people that earn income, but it's at a relatively low level and can't have too much investment income. But otherwise, if you're just farming or working and making some money, there's a credit available. And it, like a lot of these things, it depends on your filing status, how many kids you have, et cetera, et cetera. Married with 2 dependents, as long as you don't earn over $50,000, again, here's kind of that, you can get $5,500 plus of credit. So it's something we can, again, we can manage this a little bit and maybe earn a good credit. Another one is for child and dependent care expenses. Those of you that have little kids and have some dependent care expenses, again, depending on your AGI and how much money you're making, we can get 20 to 30% of something of your expenses or your income. And again, a good one. I noticed that all these have a little different income level. So we have to almost track every one of them. I can't keep track of every one myself, but at least not on the top of my head. But the idea of all these, the next one's retirement savings. Some of you say, I don't have kids, but maybe you're putting a little bit in retirement savings. If you have a low income year, maybe 10 to 50% of what you're putting into your IRA or SEP can be used, and let the government fund a part of your retirement. If you can get, you put in a couple thousand and you get $500 credit, they're helping fund that. So a pretty good one. Again, that one you do have to have at least a little cash available to make that contribution. But all three of these, if you notice, if you look at tax philosophy, what do all three of these do? They try to reward someone that makes some income, but at a low, modest level, I guess. So if that happens, we try to take advantage of that. The premium tax credit, this one relates to the healthcare one. Credit for enrolling in healthcare through the insurance marketplace. A lot of discussion about this the last couple of years. You can get subsidized, you get this via this advanced premium tax credit. So you tell them what you think your income is going to be. They look at how much your health insurance would cost and decide if your income's low enough, they'll give you a tax credit and they'll give some of that to you up front. Okay. Then, this is where I get pulled into it. They decided they would do this through your tax return. When that year's over, they look back, we see how much your income actually was, and they decide that you either should have gotten more or you got too much. And if you got too much, you have to pay it back with your tax return. Now, this worried me at first because I thought, oh, great. My farmers are, everybody's going to go out there and get these credits. And then it comes down to tax time. I'm going to have to be the one to tell them, by the way, you've got to pay some back. Well, number one, that hasn't happened too much for the clients I have that have used it. The other thing is that I realized after a year or two that there's no penalty for it. You've got the money for a year at least. If nothing else, it's a zero interest loan from the government. And so if that's the worst case and you think about it that way, and farmers are used to writing a fairly big check at tax time, so maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. I don't know, but something to think about. How are we doing, Robin? We're probably still way over. Okay, I know I wasn't the one to catch up, I'm sure. Well, I think I'll kind of skip the hobby loss rules. I do get people that ask me about that because they're worried if they lose money, somehow they'll be considered a hobby. And I think from the history of farming, that's not true. On that slide where it talks about making money 3 out of 5 years, that's the way to prove that you're not a hobby. If you lose money you still have other ways of showing that, hey, I'm trying to make a profit. They're not going to immediately call you a hobby. So from what I've seen, that's really not something we have to worry too much about. A couple things on the Kansas side. As most of you have learned, you hear the news, you know why partly Kansas with our tax problems. Kansas is not taxing your Schedule F or Schedule C or Schedule E. They do ignore your NOL if you do create one. In fact, so they will add back into your income anything you go below zero on your Schedule F. So going negative certainly does not help you on the Kansas side. So that's another reason to not try and do it. Now, so that's all good, maybe. Other people think Kansas won't tax farmers on anything. They do tax your gain from the sale of cattle or crops or cattle or machinery, your capital gains and gains from capital items. However, in a low-income year, if your Schedule F is negative, we can go back in and have them not count, say, those cow sales. So there's a provision to exclude that from income if you have a negative Schedule F. So just a kind of another thing to be thinking about and watching out for if it is a low-income year. We might not have to. Leases, Greg mentioned a little bit about leases. This is something I guess that we just have seen come up a little bit. And he maybe gave you some clues. Anybody brave enough? Why in your mind do you want to lease sometimes? Anything? There's a couple things here, but you might want to throw in some other reason. It might be tied to those, or whether it's machinery or land, or sometimes it's nice to control an asset without having to own it and make a big down payment and do a lot. So certainly can be some advantages to leasing. But where we get into some issues is really probably in this difference or distinction between the capital and operating lease. And that gets somewhat hard to distinguish. We use the term lease in two different ways, and it can make a big difference on the tax side. A capital lease really is a sales purchase. And so, if you look at what the IRS says, and you look at each of these, a portion of each payment is equity, a portion of each payment is interest. Okay, you got principal and interest basically. The amount paid is larger over the lease is a large portion of the purchase price. At the end, you have the option to buy at a price lower than fair market value. Well, who's giving you that deal? They're not giving you that deal if you're not buying it. I mean, essentially. So if you look at most of these, that's what the IRS would say it adds up to. It adds up to a purchase versus an operating lease. So if we say that and we categorize it, then it looks just like any other debt finance purchased. It's just the way to finance it. The interest portion is deductible. The rest is the principal payment, non-deductible. The asset, we can put it on depreciation and take depreciation. It goes on your balance sheet. So just like any other purchased asset. That, of course, is different than the operating lease. They're not debt financed. They are maybe what we traditionally talk about with the lease. Now your payment is deductible. The asset's not on your balance sheet. It's not depreciated. And we handle it just like any other lease. The kind of the trap here as we move into, maybe because of low income or just maybe because of circumstances. Let's say you have had an owned asset. You've had a tractor. And you decide, or you have that combine, and you want to trade it and move to a lease. Well, what happens? It's treated as being sold. You've traded it. In your mind, you may not be thinking you're selling it, but it's treated as sold. The sale proceeds are applied toward the prepayment of a lease. And here's something I didn't know until fairly recently. Those prepayments are not deductible up front. They are deducted over the life of the lease. So what have you done? You've created income, but you've got no cash because you moved it right into a lease, and even the expense for that lease isn't deductible up front. So just one of those traps, if you're not thinking about, you're making a good decision otherwise, but you created some pretty significant tax consequences. Well, I think I'll try to keep us from getting too far off schedule. There's a couple other issues here. Cancellation of debt, which is a taxable event. To try to another killjoy. You think somebody's going to write off your debt, and you're going to, hey, that's great, right? But that becomes taxable. So there's some other, those last couple items or last few slides are kind of these traps that we can run into. And we are maybe starting to see, maybe the last slide talks about how many of you've bought machinery and you've written it off in the last few years. Most people have. Then you turn around and sell it, you've got no basis in it, and all of a sudden we start to create a lot of income with no cash to pay. So those kind of things are probably the issues that keep us worried a little bit. But anyway, I'll let you look at those unless you have a question. I would feel that if you have a question, but otherwise I'll let you look at what's left there. Anything at all that you're wondering?
You said if you miss a year, no pay, your disability.
It is more. That's a good question. It is more than a year, and I've tried to look, and I cannot tell. So if you have missed a year, I would not. Don't worry. But but at some point, yes, you have not paid. Then you would not qualify. And I've just recently I've tried to look that up, and I couldn't find out something a little more specific as to how long you could go without it. So yeah, don't worry if you miss a year, but somewhere you get current again. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. 10 or 15 minute break, Robin says. So stretch and get a drink.
Well, thanks for sticking around. I know this is kind of a long day. My name is Dwayne Hund. Can you hear me? Can't hear me.
Say, it looks like it's on, Josh. You want to check it?
Try it again. Now can you hear me? Okay, good. Up here it all sounds the same. Now I can hear me. Yeah. Well, good afternoon. I'm Dwayne Hund. For the last 32 years, I've worked as a farm analyst. Okay. So I need to be in front or behind? Am I right here? I'll move away. That going to work?
Can you all hear him?
Can you hear me now? I'm not the Verizon guy, but I'll check with you. Okay, well, good afternoon again. My name is Dwayne Hund. I'm the director of the Farm Analyst Program at K-State. I started in 1985 when there was a growing need for assistance to help farm families, much as we're doing today. And over time, it's been my privilege to work with over 1,000 farm families throughout Kansas in the last 32 years. We're busy and busier as time goes on here. Keep trying to get everything best we can here. That better? Okay. My job as a farm analyst is to work with farm families on a variety of issues, the most important of which is to work with them concerning financial issues. About half of my referrals each year come from the Kansas Ag Mediation Service. There are a number of us throughout the state that work at this, and we're busy, as you might suspect, with helping farm families through some challenging times right now. So one of the questions I get quite often now is it time to retire? The average age of farmers in the state of Kansas is advancing. I think the last time I heard a census, it was 58. I work with more than a few farm families where the principal operator is pushing 80 or might be even older than that. And you know, it's time to be thinking about transitioning. I do a lot of that kind of work, have been through through the since 1980, but particularly through the late 90s and through the 2000s here. It's been real important to consider that question. So is it time to retire? Maybe, but a lot of people don't know. And you know, one of the things you get a question about is it time to turn over the reins? And if I do, will I be useful? What will I do? What will be, you know, will I be able to afford to retire? That's a big question I get. And given the range in commodity prices, you know, is now the time to retire? Is now the time to make room for the next generation? I like to have people visualize what their goals are in retirement. Many families' identity, you know, the farmer's identity is in his farm. We don't generally have hobbies. We don't need them. We're so diversified in what we do each day that, you know, we're not sitting in a cubicle doing the same thing every day and needing some diversion. So few farmers have hobbies, and the first step, I think, is to visualize what retirement will look like for you. Stacy Warner made this comment. She said, it's not whether you are retiring, it's a matter of what you are retiring to. So one of the things that I do with people is I ask them to draw 3 or 4 things that represents your ideal retirement. For me, the ideal retirement is spending more time with family and friends. It's always tough to try to work that in, and I like to spend more time with family and friends. I have 7 grandsons and 1 granddaughter, 3 daughters that are married, 2 sons that are not yet, and they present an opportunity to be available and mentor and spend more time with them. I am a big proponent of education. I served on the school board for 8 years. They finally let me off for good behavior. And if you've ever been on the school board, you know what I mean. It's a challenge sometimes, but it's very rewarding too. But I have a strong belief in education. My wife and I like to travel and learn new things, but traveling. And so that cruise ship represents an opportunity that we like to get away. And I'm in the cattle business. In fact, I was treating a steer this morning that had a bad eye, and got away from there and forgot to change my boots. So I'm still wearing my work boots, in case you wondered why. Didn't realize that till I was in the car. I'm going, well, that's all right. I'll just wear them. But this is kind of some of the things that are important to us and to me in retirement, what I'd like to do. So does this picture involve opportunity? You know, mentoring grandchildren is something that's very important. I didn't know either one of my grandfathers very well. My grandfather on my dad's side passed away a couple months after I was born. And my mother's father passed away when I was 4, and I just barely remember him. But, you know, I think mentoring grandchildren is a real important issue. You know, opportunity to do things you always wished you could do or had time to do in retirement. Improving relationships with old friends, seeing some other parts of the country or the world. Maybe buy that sports car you always wanted when you were younger. I'm going to get that Camaro one of these days. That's on my list. In fact, I want it to be yellow with black stripes, so when I walk out of Walmart and I'm half senile, can't remember where my car is parked, that's the only one that will be there and I'll see it. So what do you want to contribute or give to help to bring about retirement? You know, it could be financial or time related. It could be political or social change. Maybe you want to be involved in making a difference in the world. What are your passions to make a difference? That's a question I like to ask people. What is it important to you? You got to be practical. You know, how many of us know of someone who sold the farm, moved to town, and they passed away within a year? I see a lot of people nodding. Yeah, why does that happen? You know, they lost their purpose. They don't have a need to get out of bed in the morning and challenge themselves with something. Without a plan, you know, we feel our value is lost. You know, we all need to be needed, and we have worth to our community and our family and our Creator. I think it's important to remember that. So we have to go through the practical side of it, and that practical side is, what are the financial obligations? Is there long-term debt? You know, that keeps Dad from thinking about retirement. New investments to provide for the following generation. What can be done to set things up so that they're well taken care of? And healthcare issues is always an issue. So how do I factor in inflation, increasing life expectancies? Is selling part of the farm maybe the answer? I've had several retiring farmers say, well, I've got this debt, I can't walk away from that, but have they considered maybe selling that piece of property with the equity they have in it to their son or daughter-in-law and have them take over the remaining debt, relieve them of the responsibility, and make it easier for dad to consider retirement if he doesn't have to face that payment anymore? Certainly some things to consider there. What about just selling or gifting the improvements? You know, the next generation needs a base to work from, and it's really important that we consider how we can set them up to be successful. I tell people all the time, our comfort in our retirement years is tied to training our successors well. And we need to give them the opportunity to build on what we've done and help them achieve their goals. You know, can I use my net worth to provide for a suitable retirement? There's been more than one time when I've worked with an elderly family that wants to retire and turn it over, and I've helped them look at their Social Security payments and everything they'd be getting in the way of rent. And they look at me and say, you know, I think I'd be making more if I turned it over to the kid than I would if I keep farming. Sometimes that's the case, but the big bottom line is it's doable in a lot of cases. So, you know, what age do I take my Social Security? Do I look at cash rent or crop share? Maybe I'm going to sell the cows or lease them out. Sell land on a 20-year contract to your successor and create an annual income for yourself in your retirement by doing that. We're not talking about selling the farm totally. We're talking about just part of it and giving that next generation a chance to build some equity. Analyze carefully to arrive at the answers. You know, we may be surprised at analyzing all the alternatives. There are some answers there that we can consider. Productive retirement takes planning, and maybe now is the time to consider some form of retirement. You know, commodity prices are low right now, margins are narrow, but we need to work out an arrangement that works for both parties. You can't start too early. So I've got a lot of people that I'm working with right now that are working on 5-year time horizons, thinking I'm not going to retire right now, but I am going to retire or work hard towards a retirement plan in 5 years. So what do we do now to stair step into that? Make that a reality, how we can get there. Again, you can't start too early. We do have resources, including our program, to help you come up with the answers here and analyze the alternatives. The Family Resource Management Program Focus Team, the Adult Development Aging Program Team, our farm management economists like Scott back here, our farm analyst team, and our program focus team in farm management at the university. So what about the next generation? That's your legacy, and you want that to continue. It takes careful planning to make that happen. So the critical questions is now the time for the next generation to come back? How many of you would agree that now is the time for them to consider coming back? Who thinks now is the worst time to be coming back? Well, it all depends on a lot of issues. There is no clear-cut answer for the blanket, but I would say now is approaching a better time to be coming back to the farm than it was 5 years ago, because a lot of inputs are going down in price. I think there's going to be more elderly people who seek retirement. There'll be more land on the market to rent, and machinery and equipment certainly is not going up. It's worth a chance to look at some of that opportunity and see what you can do with it. So what if the next generation has already come back and now the business is struggling to support them? I get several of those a year where the problem is, how do we make this work for dad and the son? Because the base wasn't very large to begin with. When profits were higher, they were able to make that work, and now they've gone down and there's not enough income to go around. So we need to sit down and strategize and figure out how we can make this work. So the answer is now not the time for the next generation to come back. Yes, no, maybe, or I don't know. If you want to consider what your opportunities are, we'd be more than happy as a farm analyst team to work with you. In addition to the 3 other farm analysts that I have that work on my team, we have in the last 2 years trained 30 county agents across the state of Kansas to help with this process. And they're just in their formative stages. They've taken the training. They know how to run the programs that we run through a software program called FinPack. but they need our help as seasoned analysts and farm management economists to interpret the data and help with. But they're helping us see the needs of more people and work together to find out what we can do to make the opportunity for you to consider your options a reality. So yes, now is not the time for the next generation to come back. But maybe no, maybe it's insane to even consider it. Again, each individual operation is going to stand on its own, and we need to look at it carefully and construct a plan that could work. So maybe now might be the time, or it might not be the time, but what problems do farm and ranch families typically have in succession? You know, communication is a problem in many cases, assessment of what is realistic, development of a shared vision for the family business, and once again, we need to create new leaders for our business. Excuse me. The new leaders that we're going to rely on to provide us income in our retirement years. Very, very important. And we need to transition from being a boss to being a mentor. I had a man tell me years ago when I was working with him, he said, you know, I'll give my son enough latitude in his ideas so that he skins his knees, but I won't let him go so far that he breaks his legs. You know, we want to have the opportunity to let our kids do their own thing, but not let them go over the wall too far. So maybe now is the time to consider the next generation coming back. The question is, when are you going to begin? When are you going to start? What timelines are you going to look at? When is going to be your time to think about mentoring the next generation to succeed you? Again, it's very case dependent. Begin by attending meetings to learn what works and what may not. Visualize again what your retirement would look like. Set timelines for keeping things moving. Seek outside experts for facilitation. This is hard stuff to talk about. You know, it is. And we need somebody to come in many cases and help facilitate the discussion. Seek an attorney who specializes in transition planning. This is really critical. I've seen many attorneys that are hometown that do a variety of things, but when it comes to doing estate planning and transition planning, it's critical that you get somebody that practices that routinely. They know their stuff and they'll be able to guide you the right direction. Again, the resources that are up there, Dr. Greg Hadley, who's the Assistant Director of Ag and Natural Resources to K-State, came to K-State with one of his passions was transition planning. Charlotte Olson and Charlie Griffin, besides myself, are very good at the human resource side of it, looking at communication and helping farm families work together. And Forrest Bueller and Shar Henton from the CAMS office, the Family Resource Management Program Focus Team, the Farm Management Team again, and the economists. All of us are out there to help you with this process. So please let us know if there's something we can do. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think we're catching up a little bit on time. I want to remind you that you have the yellow evaluations. We need you to fill those out and turn those in before you leave. And I'll be around here. I'd be more than happy to visit with you individually and answer any questions you might have about what we can do. Okay? And can I answer any questions right now, briefly? Yes.
Do you ever think that quite possibly to go a little overboard on helping the next generation? I mean, I know it's a little different from farming, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, maybe the next generation needs to go of their own.
That's a matter of perspective, of course, but I would agree that I have seen more than a few situations where dad has taken on a lot of debt in order to set things up. And, you know, sometimes it isn't such a bad idea if the son is in the arena, you know, fighting the same battle and working a little extra hard to make it happen. There certainly is merit to dad helping his son to a certain point, but yes, sometimes it goes overboard. And The important thing is that it works for both parties.
Well, I look back, post World War II, my dad's generation, there were so many farmers that just started in farming on their own.
Yeah.
With no help at all. And now that generation is just really gone.
Yeah.
You've just got a few people now that are extra large. And there's not that opportunity for young people to get in farming unless they're in an established operation already. And I think, are we just helping that generation too much? That there was a drive back then.
Yeah.
People, but, they got started, and they did it themselves, they had a goal and purpose, and it's just a thought.
Yeah. It is a good thought, and that's the reason why before you enter into this discussion and get very far, there needs to be some planning done to have an agreement between retiring generation and the newcomers coming in to really focus on what level of risk that dad and son want to take. It can vary a lot, and some dads, feel compelled to create quite a nice setup for their sons. Others are more reserved. I've seen many of them that won't go that far. When I started out after college, my dad the first thing he told me was, he said, it's up to you to build your own business plan. He was 65 when I graduated. He was 11 years older than my mother. And he said, whatever you need, he said, you can use what I've got, but if you need somebody to co-sign a loan, I won't do that. He said, it was up to you, he told me, to figure out what I needed and take that plan to the bank and get my own loans, what I needed to do. It kept me very conservative so that when the 80s hit, I wasn't in a position of trying to survive. I was able to grow during that time period. So it was just timing more than anything. But I'm 62 now, and I'm looking at transitioning possibly to one of my grandsons down the road here. It just depends on their needs and wants, but there's a lot of opportunity there to grow from the values that our fathers have set for us, and I think a good plan and good communication is the first step. Okay. Any other questions? Again, I'll be around. Thank you for your attendance here today. I know it's a long day, but hopefully you're gaining some things, and we appreciate your attention. So thank you. Monty, get you all rigged up here.
You got need this one too. One's for the computer, one's for the.
And do we have a clicker? Yes. Maybe all these microphones mean if we're recorded, I've got to be careful what I say. So, well, the first question, I guess, was for Robin. If everyone who stays, do they get their registration back for sticking it out? All right, there you go, guys. Good job. Let me introduce myself. I'm Monty Vandeveer, and here we go. Yeah, I'm Monty Vandeveer. I guess I can still call myself the new extension economist out in Garden City. I started as the Southwest area office last February, so it's a long drive from Garden City. But it's nice to be with you today, and we're going to talk about family living expenses here as our last segment. Sometimes we're in the mindset of when things are tight, well, one of the things we really have to cut is on the family living side, and sometimes There's some obvious choices there, and sometimes that may be a lot harder thing to do than what we think. And so we're going to walk through some data we have from the Kansas Farm Management Association and look at maybe the question how far we can tighten our belt. So first of all, we're going to look at this KFMA data on how farm income and living expenses have gone up and down over the last several years, and then maybe break it down on the living expense side, look at the different categories and see maybe are there some opportunities there to try to squeeze some savings out there or not. And at the end, we've got a few simple tools. If this is something you think we need to do in your household, then there's some tools you can use that maybe help you through that process. So mentioned that we're going to use the Kansas Farm Management data. There's about 1,200 households in there. About 400 of them keep detailed records on their family living expenses, and those are the households we're going to look at. So we'll look at both the income side, and we're going to look at 17 different categories of expenses. Okay, that's the way their system's set up. And of course, the numbers I'm going to show you will be an average household, but of course, every household is unique, right? And they have their own special needs and situations. And so just keep that in mind as we go through. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, but we have to start somewhere, so we're going to look at the averages. This chart is just to say the red line, our red line is the 400 households that have the detailed records. The blue line is the overall 1,200 families. I just threw this in to say, yeah, I think these groups are pretty representative. We should be tracking with the average. This is what overall household income looked like since, well, starting in 2004, and then we have the final data for 2015. That's the last complete year that we have in. And so this is what total household income looked like over that time period. Now the average over that 12 years or so was about $130,000. That was better than my household income. And I think our maximum year was 2011. We actually peaked for this average family at about $196,000. Now that farm household, or that household income, breaks down into couple different general categories. One is, of course, these are mostly commercial farms that are in the system, so most of their income is on the farm side. They do have some non-farm income, averages about $39,000 across this whole 400 families. Of course, some households, that's going to be the salary working off farm. Others, that's going to be royalties from oil and gas, or other rental income. Could be a whole variety of things, but on average it comes out about $39,000. Now on the farm side, that's the biggest chunk of income. We averaged about $91,000 through that entire period. That sweet year of 2011, it was $164,000. What happened last year? All the way down to just about $12,000 of farm income. Okay, and gosh, when you look at the trend, it's not a real pretty picture there. So anyway, that's the income side of things. When you look at expenses over that same time period, the green is family living and the red is taxes we had to pay. So farm household, the average living expense is about $58,000 over that time period. But look how much it changed. It was at about $42,000 back in the beginning, reached the maximum of about $74,000. So from that lowest to that highest, about 77% increase. Okay, so there's a significant increase there, and so we'll look at later, is there room to maybe squeeze some savings out of that. Now when you compare the money that was coming in to the money that's going out, here's what it looks like. So the red line is our family living plus our taxes that we're spending. We've had several years of some pretty good surplus for our average household, remember. Several good years of pretty good surplus, but then look at what happened in 2015. We got about a $40,000 deficit. And how are we going to cover that? Well, hopefully we've saved a little bit of money from the fat years to help with the lean years, but we're going to have to take a look at maybe we can squeeze some money out of that. So this is just a recap. Our farm households, that farm income is obviously they're the main source of income. And farm income, we've always known it goes up and down. You guys have been in the game long enough, you know that. And we've had several years. The good news, we had several years. It was really some really good years. The bad news is it's gone down for about 4 years in a row. 2016 is probably going to be the 5th year in a row. And the next couple years after that aren't looking real bright, are they? So for most households, non-farm income is not going to be enough to cover that full family living expense. And do many farm households in rural Kansas have a lot of lucrative job opportunities out there to maybe make up the difference? Not many, are there? No. So that's probably not going to be the answer. Off-farm income is probably not going to be the answer for most of the folks out here either. So what are we going to have to do on the spending side? Well, it did run up over 70%, so are there places to cut back? And kind of keep that $40,000 deficit in mind. As we look at some of these family living expense categories, how much are we going to be able to squeeze out of the budget that you're going to see? Okay. I think the only consolation of lower farm income is that our income taxes will go down, but we're going to have to see if we can squeeze some money out of the family living side. So here's the family living, and remember we said that average over that time period was about $58,000. It increased 77% from this low to this high. Now, I put this number in here to say, well, what about inflation? Well, inflation over that time period went up about 28%. That means if we were buying the same stuff then that we were buying at the beginning, our expenses would have been 28% higher. So during this time, we spent a little bit more. We've got some more things or maybe some nicer things. And sometimes the price went up too. So more than inflation, that's going to be a problem. So, but that's all to say maybe we have a little bit of room to squeeze. And here's the first half of those 17 family living expense categories. Okay, it's kind of hard to read in your packet, but what I've done is I've ranked them from the highest average spending to the lowest. That's the average over that 12-year time period. We've got the lowest amount and then the highest amount for that same 12 years. And then how big the percentage increase was, how much the percent increase was during that time period. It's time to go. Okay. That's my 2-minute warning. I have to talk fast. So I bolded these. If the category increased more than that 77% average, I bolded the category just to highlight it as one that was going up faster than average. Okay. So it turns out our biggest category is the personal and recreation side. And it didn't quite double during that time period. It was a big number. And I know a few families, they probably took the vacation of the lifetime, and others, maybe their recreation is they've got season tickets to go to the football game or whatever it happens to be. But this was a category that was probably a big increase, and probably there's some discretion in there. It's probably one of those categories we can maybe look for places we can cut back. Now this household operation, that was the next biggest category. It almost doubled during that time period. This is kind of a catch-all category for all the other household spending that doesn't fit in the other categories. Okay, so everything from toothpaste to toilet paper to towels, and I'm not sure what the biggest item is in that category, but it did go up quite a bit, way faster than the rate of inflation. So we have to consider that as a possibility for maybe an area to cut back. Food was not a big category of increase. Health insurance basically doubled during this time period. And I think that's probably going to be the scariest category that you guys are going to have to deal with. I was at the Southwest Farm Management Association board meeting in Dodge City maybe about a month ago, and the association economists were saying we've got people paying well over $1,000 a month for their health insurance. We even had one who was paying one case over $2,000 a month. And when you look at this $8,300, that figures out about $700 a month. So is anybody here, are you guys seeing the same health insurance increases? I see several heads nodding. Yeah. Yeah, and all the things that are happening in the insurance market and Obamacare, that is probably part of that. If you're not part of a big group employee plan, you're self-employed, then your rates are probably shooting up. Yeah. So the money that we can maybe save in some of our other categories, some of it's going to get eaten up by what we do on the health insurance side. So this is probably the toughest one we're going to have to deal with. Our other medical costs was not a big increase category. Contributions, so that's like money to church and to United Way and your other charities that you give to, then your tax deductible category and your tax form, that's what that one is. It more than doubled, so probably a little bit of discretion in there, a little bit of wiggle room. House upkeep and repairs, that was probably our biggest percentage increase. And there's probably some cases where Ma finally got that new kitchen she was waiting for, or Dad may have built him a man cave. And of course, a lot of us old farmers, it's just stuff that you were waiting 20 years to fix up, you finally got fixed up. You know, it's not all luxury hog wild stuff on this home improvement. So hopefully we were able to make the repairs in the good years, because that may be a category where we're going to have to defer maybe some improvements we were hoping for till things get better. Gifts, another category, big increase. You know, that's birthday, anniversary, Christmas. We can have some discretion in that one. Life insurance, that was a bigger increase. Here's the other set of categories. Automobile, that's about $250 a month. Utilities, telephone, not a big increase category. Furniture and equipment. How many farmers do you know that have a recliner that's old enough to vote? Yeah. And so we finally have a good year and we can replace that. But now the new recliner is going to have to wait till he's old enough to vote to get updated. So maybe that's probably one where we have some more discretion there. We can defer things if we just have to. Education was not a big category. Bank interest, I'm guessing that's probably our credit card interest is in there. Probably not a lot of farm households have big credit card debt. Bank interest, yeah. Miscellaneous expense. Child care, had a comment at another meeting on the child care side. Not many, the reason that number is so low is not many of our 400 families have, you know, kiddos. at home. So that number is going to look small. But the ones who do have kids, this rate of increase may be another category that eats up some of the savings that we squeeze out of the other categories, right? So it's interesting as we go through all these categories, it's kind of easy for me to look at the chart and say, well, you can save some here, you can save some there. But in a lot of farm households, that's, there's going to be some anxiety and some tension on, we're in a squeeze, and what are we going to do? How are we going to make that work? And, I grew up in a farm household where communication wasn't our strongest suit, and so this is going to be a time of stress for some of our farm families down the road. And I want to underline that statement just by looking at this chart. All the numbers that we looked at were the numbers for this average farm household. When you look at the income distribution across the whole 1,200 families in the system, well, we had, say, let's start at this category and go up. We've got about 30% of the farm households that maybe aren't in a big pinch yet. Now, if our farm income was in this range, that's about a quarter of us, and we're starting to get pinched there. But look, we had over 44% of our households who lost money on the farm last year. And this isn't just pinch time, this is, honey, how are we going to make this work? And so hopefully the households, we can sit down and start thinking about how we're going to do this. When I started, I was with K-State Extension in the early 90s, and I would ride with Dwayne Hunt to these FinPAC consulting sessions. And, at least half of the meeting would be more of a how would you say, I won't say a therapy time, but it was a time of helping families deal with this, all this stress that they're facing, and how are we going to make this work? So when we see the 2016 numbers, we're probably going to get another dose of the same, and it's going to be some tough times out there. So if we are worried about trying to save some money on the household side, what can we do? First thing is try to keep some better records. If you had records like the folks in the system we looked at, you could say, how much am I spending on each category? How much do I think maybe I can save, and where should I try to save it? You're kind of flying blind if you don't have a good sense of where you've been spending your money. I'm kind of a software computer guy. Quicken, if you're into keeping your records that way, that's an inexpensive way. You can set that up pretty quickly, not hard to learn. And once you get the system set up, you can get a lot of information at your fingertips really quickly. Now, whether you use the Quicken or not, though, you can develop just a simple household budget. And extension, and not just K-State Extension, but extension from really all the states, has been working on the subject of household budgets for years. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a couple fact sheets from K-State that you can look up and give some guidelines on what's the typical spending for this category and that category, and how should we set our priorities, and how can we make this work. Iowa State has a fact sheet about just the family farm finances. Minnesota, I found this website, it was really interesting. Had a section not just on healthy wallets, but healthy minds and getting through tough times. So, this isn't just a cold numbers exercise. This is a give and take of what are we going to have to give up to make this work. I'm going to show you a tool from if you have to flip back a page or two in your packet, but we put this printout in there. The first page, this is kind of the summary section. And what you do is like, this is the income side, a lot of detailed, where do I get income from? Work out your totals and then plug it into the summary section. So here's your sources of income. Now and then the next page is all these categories of expenses, okay? And it's really detailed. You know, it's easy to overlook what we spend. I'm that way. I don't realize how much I'm spending on this. If I, you know, actually added it up, it might be kind of scary. But it tries to be a thorough list of all the places you spend your money. Then go back to that sheet and put the totals in here and compare our income and our expenses. And where do we come out on that? And then you have your worksheet to go back to. Well, can I cut some here? Can I cut some there? And so on, okay? A lot of tools like this take different forms, but there's plenty of tools out there like this that can help a household start to get a handle on the spending situation, okay? So, just to wrap up, we're going to have to figure out some ways we can save money. For our average household, at least, there seem to be some categories. We can at least save a little bit of money where there's some discretion involved. Some of the other categories, there's not a lot of give and take. I mean, we're not a lot of cuts to be had. So hopefully we can do a better job looking at our records, know where we're spending the money, and think about how much we can save, and do some budgeting and see if we can make this work. So, comments, questions? I think this is all that I wanted to cover this afternoon. I've already spent I've done my Christmas shopping. Other comments, yeah. Well, you all get awards for remaining upright and conscious, and check with Robin for your money back. Seriously, if there are a lot of resources out there, and Dwayne was mentioning those at the end of his remarks. Families that are really wrestling with some of this stuff. We have some people who can work one-on-one, and it's discreet and respectful, and we can try to help you out. So thanks everybody for coming. You know, this is my first time at the Parsons facility. It's a lovely facility. It's fun to be down here and meet you guys. So thanks again for coming. A little. Wind is different, it seems like. And the odor is different too from Garden City.
So our last topic of the day was Bay State Resources for Assistance. I'm not really going to make that a full presentation, but I want to point out your booklet. There are 3 brochures towards the end. One is the Kansas Ag Mediation Services. One is the Farm Analyst Program that Dwayne Hunt is the director of and mentioned, and the other one is the Kansas Farm Management Association. So when you get home and have some time, look at these brochures and really kind of familiarize yourself with those resources. If you don't need them this year, it might be something to consider in future years. These aren't just things for when times are tough, these are things for any time. So with that, again, if you can leave your surveys on the table. Josh, did you have anything else? Okay, we will turn you loose. Again, thank you for coming today, and we'll stick around for a little bit, and then probably hit the road. So, thank you. Darrell, I think we are wrapped up here. How's things going at your end?
Pretty much wrapped up here as well.